Hello. Alright. Slightly challenging lighting. I think my camera was struggling here for a sec. Hopefully it keeps behaving. It turns a bit more light in case that ends up helping. Come on. Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. And let's see. Maybe this one. Light ceiling. Okay. Alright. That might give slightly more consistent lighting. All right, hello everyone. Back to another IncusOS live stream. Don't know how many of you might have also seen the video that was put out last weekend, but if you want to see more of kind of the dual IncusOS Operation Center Migration Manager interaction, there's a lengthy an hour and a half video that kind of shows deploying everything from beginning to end, including moving some VMs and everything. So if you haven't seen it yet and you've been watching what's going on with IncusOS and some of the other projects, I'd recommend you go take a look at that. And otherwise, let's get back to IncusOS, look at what happened the past week, and then start looking at Tailscale for this week. All right, so what happened since last Thursday? Quite a few things happened. All right, there we go. That's where we're at. So last week, I used the live stream to work on a new CLI package. So effectively moving the logic we had for the IncusOS CLI client from just being within the Incus package, within the Incus command, and into its own, excuse me, into its own Go package within the IncusOS codebase that can then be consumed not just by Incus, but also Operation Center, Migration Manager, anything else that might be running as a primary application on top of IncusOS. So that's been done. And we'll see there's some other commits that showed up later where I've further cleaned things up effectively on that side. I also added a bunch more commands. It's not quite where we want it, but it's getting very close to where we want it. Anyways, other than that, did some tweaks on handling of existing datasets. So that's specifically if you're restoring a backup of IncusOS and you had a pool that was defined outside of the local pool, then we'll handle that better in general. So I think as re-importing datasets, re-importing actually, no, this one was for factory reset of the application or something like that, where effectively the local storage pool still exists and the Incus dataset within it exists, which was then causing an issue with initialization. So that's been sorted out. But there's more similar logic around handling factory reset, backup restore, that kind of thing, where we need to deal with existing state effectively and re-importing it. We had a bit of an issue that kept popping up where IncusOS post installation tells you to remove the install media so that it can reboot onto the installed system. But if you're using Incus itself, like an Incus VM as to install IncusOS, and you remove the install media, we actually run into a bit of a race condition where we reboot so quickly that the Incus VM device hot remove code gets very confused because the VM is being rebooted as the CD-ROM is being removed. So adding a small delay, I think 3 seconds or 5 seconds, so that in any similar situation, the drive can be correctly removed and then the system reboots shortly afterwards. I've also added a new endpoint called reset on the services, specifically to implement resetting of LVM. So clustered LVM in some environments, like if you, well, in some situations, so if there is like a fiber channel connectivity issue, NVMe over TCP connectivity issue or the like, you might exceed the locking mechanism's timeout and get your system in a situation where you can't actually perform any more writes to anything. And there's no super easy way to reset those things, those locks cleanly. So I've added an option here that effectively resets the entire locking mechanism So it reestablishes new locks with the other systems, and then that unblocks everything. So that just makes it a bit more, that makes it easier to unblock those kind of situations without having to resort to rebooting servers effectively. Now, what do we have next here? So that's what I mentioned also earlier, like adding new actions to the CLI and improving general support for non-JSON data in the CLI, tweaking the some of the APIs to work better with the CLI, and Matthias also fixed a couple of bugs in like is working on automated tests for a bunch of the API, and so wants the API to be more consistent. So effectively, it's why we're improving the handling of the by ID symlinks, making sure we also return those always in the same order so that it's more predictable and easier to test. A bit of cleanup on the secure boot logic. So like it was getting pretty complex. Like we had single files for doing secure boot and TPM together, and it was getting a bit difficult to follow. So still as part of testing, he ended up splitting that so that it's easier to test and get outputs that we can then validate during our tests. Then you can see we've updated. So one of the tasks that we had for towards the end of this year was generating the 2026 signing key and starting to push it out to users. So we've generated the key, I think, back on Monday. And we've now made the public key available on our image server. We've created a secure boot update that will auto-enroll a new key. That's going to be part of the image here. And just before this live stream, I was actually signing some more artifacts to make like clean installation automatically include the new signing key as well. So we actually have an image building right now here, which hopefully includes everything we need to ship both the 2025 and 2026 keys, and also has some fixes on how to interact with image servers and that kind of stuff. So this one will hopefully be built soon, and we can then use it for some of the work later today. All right, so that was 26 key. That's the drive sorting I mentioned earlier, still to make it easier to test. Generating the scan. So that's there was an extra step to better test the backups effectively. So instead of generating and streaming the backup and potentially hitting an error halfway through, which is then difficult to report to the user because it will literally be in the middle of a binary file they're receiving, we're now doing effectively an empty dry run of the backup. So it's not writing to anything. It's just running, like streaming to dev null basically. So we can validate that there's no problem with generating the backup. And if that fails, we return a clean error. Otherwise, we push that to, otherwise we go and generate the actual backup and send that to the user. Bit more cleanup. So there was an issue specifically with symlinks that's been fixed, still on backups. We now keep track of whether the first boot, whether we had a successful boot with the network config specifically, which then makes it possible to be very strict on the first apply of the network config, where if anything goes wrong, it gets reverted. But then once it has applied once successfully, subsequent failures, like if you reboot the machine, are not considered fatal, and we don't like try to reapply it in a loop. The reason for that is some folks are running their routers as containers or VMs on top of IncusOS. And there's a chicken and egg issue where like you can bring up the network config progressively to be correct and it will function. But if you reboot the machine, that network config will not be functional until some containers running on the machine are started. So to avoid that chicken and egg issue, that's why we now have this flag where on a reboot, the server would get a network starting failure because it wouldn't have connectivity. It would ignore that, would still start Incus. Incus would then bring up the router, at which point connectivity is restored. All right. Then simplify pull deletion API struct. Another thing I picked up when doing the CLI, the API for pull deletion was pretty confusing, so we cleaned that up. We had some test failures that would happen every so often, just enough to annoy us. So Matthias made some of our test scripts a bit more reliable, so that stops breaking CI once every 5 or 6 builds. Then I did a bunch of cleanup and tweaks on the handling of the providers. So it's removing a bunch of the code duplication, making it so we actually pass full structs and not just chunks of them across the API. Adding support for an update channel we need to track. That's been an issue for a while, because if you download a testing image, a testing image would be fine. If you were to download a stable image, it would update to a testing image immediately, because there was no actual locking and tracking of channels in the configuration. Now we've changed that, and any new update will, or any new image will default to the stable channel unless it's configured to specifically go and look at the testing channel. So that's one of the changes we rolled out. The other thing is we were missing some extra validation. The image server gives the SHA-256 value of every file. We download the index file, we validate the signature of the index file. So that guarantees effectively the values for size and hash of all of the files. But then we would go and download the files and not hash them. So in theory, downloading a file that could have a different content than the one listed in the index. It's not great. It's not a terrible issue either, because we always download over HTTPS, and the content of the files themselves, so the actual systemd, sysext, and systemd sys updates, those are signed themselves and would not be loaded by the kernel if they were wrong for some reason. So there was a potential for a downgrade type attack, where an older image, if someone was to take over our web servers and so could get past the HTTPS part, they could, without having to generate a valid index, they could replace a newer image files with files from an older image, and that would at least make it past the writing to partition mechanism. The image version would still be lower than the current one, so most systems would still boot on the other image. But anyway, there was like validation we were supposed to really have put in place that we forgot, so I've added that now. Now we actually enforce the SHA-256 checksums everywhere. Also did a bit of kind of reshuffling for handling of default values in configuration. One of those is the channel itself, which defaults to stable, but we also had a default value for the update check frequency that we've now moved from being a default value that was kind of deep in the code to being initialized right at the beginning. Another thing is, if we're doing a factory reset, we were still going through a clean shutdown, which is a bit pointless and can actually cause deadlocks in some environments if you're clustered or the like. So now if you do a factory reset, we do a force reboot immediately after, because the machine is effectively getting wiped anyways. And then a couple of tweaks that we did this morning, following some of what we noted in our image build yesterday. So there was an issue with the new handling of the stable channel, where if you were installing from an image using testing, it would still default to stable and then would fail to find its own image. So fix that logic pretty easily. And Matthias also made it so our state file on disk doesn't store runtime data. It only stores actual things that need to be persistent state. So just a bit of cleanup on that front. So that's basically where we're at. As I mentioned, I'm waiting for a build to complete. So we've got Intel completed, ARM still going. That's actually unusual as far as the ordering. Usually ARM is faster for some reason, but okay. So we should get an image shortly. File compression took 7 minutes. Yeah, that seems plausible. Okay. This one has a bit of a risk to have issues, because we just swapped some of the UEFI secure boot keys in there to also enroll the 2026 key. And we can't really test that because we need the actual signing key to be available to sign the old image with that. So to the best of our knowledge, the logic is correct, but until we actually boot that image, we won't be sure. So still need to check that. While this is going on, let's go look at what we're working on today. And there was already quite a few discussions, so it's kind of address some of that. So the issue specifically is adding Tailscale support to IncusOS. And I see in the chat there were like 2 different questions at least so far. Well, at least one question around that, which is, what about Netbird? So I've not looked at Netbird yet. I actually only started looking at Tailscale yesterday. Like it's not, I don't use either of those at all on my network. I've got a rather complex enterprisey network, given that I'm my own ISP. I've got my own AS number, and yeah, I effectively have proper site-to-sites, WireGuard, hardware offloaded, basically everywhere. If I don't have like dedicated lines between sites, so I don't really have much use for those, but I know they're quite popular. Tailscale being slightly more popular than Netbird, obviously because yeah, just better marketing, I think, and they were probably ran first. So anyway, the first question was, yeah, it would be nice to also like why Tailscale, why not Netbird? So we're tracking both, so that's fine. We're starting with Tailscale because I don't know, it's the first issue we opened basically. So I'm starting to look at that one first. What are the other questions? So there was a question around, does the loss of cluster LVM SAN connectivity get detected and trigger auto evacuation on IncusOS? So yes, it does get detected. It doesn't trigger an auto evacuation because oftentimes it will like, so there are a few different scenarios. One scenario is you just have one machine that loses connectivity for good. That will trigger auto evacuation because that machine won't be reached by the other ones in the cluster. They'll notice something is off and they will trigger an auto evacuation. The more common problem, unfortunately, tends to be an issue on the other side, so on the SAN side. Most of the issues we've seen have been issues with fiber channel switches, issues with NVMe TCP controllers, incorrect config changes to the ACLs on the SAN side. That's what we've seen being the most problematic and triggering that issue. And when that happens, all servers in the cluster lose connectivity at the same time. So in that situation, you definitely don't actually want auto evacuation because there's nowhere to evacuate to. They're all broken in the same way. Which is also why the normal mechanism of like, okay, one server is really screwed up, let's just reboot it, is also not really an option because they all are equally screwed up in that scenario. So that API basically lets us just be like, okay, locking and everything was completely messed up. Like you effectively exceeded 3 to 5 minutes without the ability to lock things properly. The locking manager is like, I can't deal with this anymore, and just everything is read-only. You can now reset it. It will take between 30 seconds and 5 minutes for all the locks to get reacquired. There's like some random waits and stuff within the clustered LVM locking in that scenario. So it takes a little while to recover, but then at the end of that, assuming there's no remaining connectivity issues, everything is back on and things unblock. Always have to be kind of careful with some of that because like it's really all of a timing thing. Like depending on the situation, the SANlog plus WDMD combo will actually trigger a server hard reboot. Like if they think that the docs are in a dangerous state where like there is an actual risk of concurrent writes, it can trigger a hard reboot of the machine. So that can also happen. So usually like in your monitoring, you would catch the event pretty quickly that like, oh crap, something is wrong with the storage. All the clusters and all the servers are misbehaving. You should immediately undo whatever change you made to the storage. Hopefully you get to do that within the 3 minutes-ish window before the locks really start expiring. If you don't, you probably have a few more minutes where you can go and reset the locks. especially if you don't have everything using the SAN. If it's mostly for like additional storage or something like that, then you might have even more than the 5 minutes before some of those locks effectively end up triggering a hardware watchdog that reboots the machine. So yeah, it's definitely to handle some specific corner cases that we have that, but we saw it a few times, at least in our testing environment. We've seen it a few times, unfortunately, on actual SAN hardware, where again, like there was some. Typically, it's rare for it to be a hardware issue. It's most commonly a configuration issue, because you normally have multiple paths through completely distinct HBAs, switches to SAN controllers, to avoid any one piece of equipment being able to take everything down. But what we've seen is automation on SAN ACLs or SAN switch configs that would then be deployed to all of them at the same time, and so everything would go down at the same time. That's more of a an operation issue really on those doing those changes. You should not do it that way, but it still happens. So having more ways to try and recover from that without having to literally restart everything, it's always welcome. All right, so covered that one. So yeah, Netbird, gonna be looking at it like this. There's a mention of like, oh, Netbird is more aligned with the values of Incus being open source. So we're not putting anything closed source in there, to be clear. The Tailscale, local daemon, and CLI are all completely open source Go codes that we're using. And if you don't want to use their server side, I've actually done some quick testing yesterday to kind of look at how things work using Headscale with the Tailscale client, and that works perfectly fine. So you can run a completely open source stack by running Headscale on the server side, running Tailscale on the client side, and it's all open source. Like, we would not include a binary client in IncusOS. That's not something we're interested in doing. So this is still completely open source. But yeah, we'll look at Netbird maybe next week, maybe at some other point. Like, that came up pretty quickly, even though the issue numbers are quite different. I think I mentioned Tailscale in a live stream, and then immediately after we had an issue being open for, hey, we should do Netbird as well. We'll have to be somewhat careful there. Like, we don't really want to include every single thing under the sun either. Like, it comes with mostly a disk size impact every time we add some, as well as testing. Like Tailscale, I think I got it down to about 20 megs for the Go binary before compression. I'll go through that after, but there's some tricks that can be done to significantly cut down the size of the binary, and we're using those tricks. We'll have to see how big Netbird ends up being, how big some of the other options end up being. All right. Yeah, so there's a question around creating local storage on IncusOS and the current lack of documentation. So yeah, documentation is one. So actually have a milestone in here now there called GA, which basically tracks what we want to see fixed before, like, we already have table builds, but before we really unleash IncusOS onto the world, like before we start making more noise, we have like web pages up and running, we start trying to get some of the press and whatnot to go look at it. There's still a bunch of issues we want to look through, and for me, the most important on there are really documentation. And yeah, that's going to cover a whole bunch of different points. So for the storage question that you have specifically, that is perfectly doable. So you use, it's in the, just go here. I mean, I don't think I've got a machine with multiple drives I can play with super duper easily right now. Actually, let's see, do I have access to dev? Yeah, okay. So that's a VM, so I can pick it, storage volume, create, on default dev disk 1, block size 50 gigs, I guess, there. So let's go and create What rate did you want? 4 NVMEs. Okay, we can try that. So let's do 4 incus config device and dev OS disk 1 disk set NVMe. It's coming from a default pool and it's dev disk 1. Okay, so that's the first one. Second one. Third. And fourth. Okay. Now if I do incus admin OS system show dev storage. Okay, so that's reporting the current config. There is no storage config in place right now. There is disk 1, 2, 3, and 4 showing up, plus a root disk. Local pool, we only have one defined, which is the local pool that we have. Now, if we wanted to create another pool, and that's where the lack of documentation is going to show, like right now, the way I would do it myself is by going to go look at what the API is for that endpoint, which would be API, so system storage is the API. And we can see, so under config, we've got pools. So we want pools, which are a list of storage pool that are defined down here. And so we can do name, let's call the pool NVMe. The type of pool, we can do a RAID Z2, I guess, maybe. Let's do RAID Z2. And then the devices would be 432. And that should be it. We can also configure things like a cache device, log devices, and the like, but just for the basics, we could do that. And now if we do show, we can see that we have not only our local pool, but we also have another pool here with the 4 drives. It's been encrypted, and we've got 1.8 so that's 180 gigs, I guess, usable. RAR size is 200 gigs. ZFS RAID Z2. So yeah, we support all of that logic. We have it. The documentation is what's currently lacking. We do have tracking for that. All right. So there's more questions around from Jared around, like, when it comes to Tailscale, NetBird, like, why do people use that? Why not just use WireGuard? And there's, I think, a question, and so there already is like, part of it is quality of life. It is definitely quite easy to get started. You basically install a client on every single machine you want. You just join with just an authentication key, and you're done. It effectively, the server side ends up handles IP allocation on all of the machines. So it gives you IPv4 and IPv6 addresses, and it then lets you configure, at least in the case of Tailscale, I've not played with NetBird yet, but lets you do a bunch of pretty complex ACLs, access control type stuff, which I understand is probably being then offloaded to the different machines that are participating in the network. And on top of your more kind of traditional WireGuard, where you might have more of a hub and spoke type mechanism, where you've got your VPS acting as your VPN server, and then a bunch of WireGuard clients connecting to that. Because Tailscale effectively has an agent on every single machine, it can run a true mesh so that you have lower latency in general. So that's basically what I've seen. Like, again, my experience with Tailscale is basically an hour playing with it and Headscale yesterday. I can kind of show you what that looks like before we go into trying to implement it within IncusOS. I'm just gonna keep a quick eye on my build here. Okay, it is done building. Cool. So that should publish to the image server shortly, and then we can see if that works. All right, so first I'll show you normal Tailscale. So if I go on here, I should be able to log in somewhere. Where was that? I guess it's a different page. I need to go. Yeah, there we go. So that's my current Tailscale thing. I've got 2 machines. Let's actually just wipe that clean. So just remove both of them. What I've done is I created a key that can be used to enroll new machines. I don't actually know where that's defined. App service is under access control, maybe? Not really. To approve test. No, not really. Anyways, effectively what I did was like do Linux server and then say I wanted a new authentication key that would be reusable. So that's what I did, which then gets you a reusable authentication key, which can be passed to the Tailscale CLI to configure the client. So wondering if it's in the settings maybe that this is buried somewhere. Device management perhaps. Device approval, telnet lock, auto update. No, not really. Huh, anyway. Oh, is he maybe this one? Yeah, off keys, there we go. So that's the authentication key that's marked as reusable. It's valid for another week. And basically anyone that has that authentication key can just go and enroll new machines in that network. So let's go play with that a bit. I do have one container here that's got the normal Tailscale packages installed. So that's kind of how most people see it. So Tailscale is installed. I have no idea what its state is right now. So let's go and nuke things, reboot the container. So basically pretending it's a completely clean install. Okay. So if I do Tailscale status, logged out, and so we do Tailscale up with that authentication key. There we go. We're connected, and if we go here on machines, we can see that machine is connected. Cool. We've got IPv4, IPv6 address, and matching DNS records that we can use to access that. So that's that one machine enrolled. Now, the other one I've got is called Tailscale Go. Do I actually have anything running on there? No. So this one, what I've done is it's my manually built version of Tailscale. I can actually fix the ownership on this one. So when I said I can make it down to 20 megs, that's the one I meant. This is actually using a single caller binary. So the CLI and the daemons are actually the same thing, just going through a symlink, and based on the name, it's one or the other. So with that one, I can do the same thing. So just wipe my Tailscale folder. We can start the Tailscale daemon in one terminal, and then in another, I'll go Tailscale here and do the same thing. So what's the up command? This guy. Run that. Okay, and we should see, yep, there we go. Second one just joined. And now the first one is ping 100, 71, 138, 44. And we can see it's now pinging effectively directly. So the first ping, I guess, was probably relayed, and then they did the hole punching UDP logic to let you do WireGuard from one to the other. Now, effectively, the network transport is WireGuard. So they configure just, it's effectively a management layer on top of WireGuard to configure the right mesh around this. The thing that's got me slightly confused is that they're doing WireGuard in user space, as far as I can tell. So the actual interface, which is Tailscale 0, this is a tunnel device. This is not a WireGuard type device, which means that if you go look at, I think I've got it in the other container actually. Yeah, if you go look at the WireGuard kernel state, there is nothing going on. It seems to all be in user space, which I guess is fine for most folks. I commonly run WireGuard on multi 10 gigabit network segments. I don't think I would be able to do that with a user space daemon. I'm pretty sure I would want the kernel, like the kernel implementation of it to get proper throughput. But anyways, so that's kind of how that works with just the normal Tailscale. That's what people kind of like. They can just join a whole bunch of machines, not have to care too much. They get the lowest latency possible. you can, is it in this one or is it in the other one again? I think it's in this one, isn't it? So I've got a bridge configured here, BR0 with a subnet. So if you want to then expose that, you can play with, where is that? It's Tailscale set, and then there's an option to also expose your subnets. So in this case, that would let us advertise a bridge, which could be like the Incus BR0 bridge. So you can do something like that. So it advertises that. And then if we go in the other container, we can do Tailscale set, I think it's accept routes true and into set, which currently it will not let me ping because I think it goes into a pending thing in the UI. Yeah, there we go, subnets. So we can see that this one is trying to advertise a subnet. So we can do route settings, approve the subnet, save, and that's gonna then reconfigure the other client so that it can go and ping the subnet. So that's kind of, I think, what a bunch of people want to see with IncusOS is basically, if you run Tailscale on it, now you can access it from any machine on your Tailscale network. And you can also advertise the subnets that are used by the local Incus BR0 bridge over the Tailscale network, and then easily, again, grant access to that to whatever machines you want. Like I've not even started playing with any of the security access control bits to allow specific ports, specific services between the different systems. Like there's quite a lot of flexibility now. And it can also do DNS, a bunch of OIDC authentication, a bunch of other stuff. So anyway, for the pieces we care about for IncusOS, I think that's basically it. It's just exposing the server onto the tailnet and then being able to expose specific subnets. And that's basically it. Now, I also mentioned Headscale. So Headscale is, again, very limited experience with that, just a few minutes last night. It's an open source implementation of the Tailscale server side. So I've got it running somewhere in my demo project, I think. Yeah, Headscale server is running there. Okay, so I've got this one running. It technically, so if I go in there, I give it a public IPv4 and IPv6 address too. So we should be able to use that as the login server. And I also have a wrong IP. This one is the one I want. It also works with the same way. Like it also has like auth tokens and all that kind of stuff. So the Headscale command users, that should show one user. There we go. And then there's pre-auth keys list for user one. There we go. So there's a reusable key here that I can use. And if we look at the list of nodes, there are 2, but they are dead, so we should remove them. Delete 1. Identifier, okay, sure. 1, yes. 2, yes. Okay. So now we've got an empty state on that Headscale server. I've got, again, I need this IP address, IPv6, because I'm running IPv6 only on my desktop, so I kind of need that. And I need the pre-auth key for user one. Okay, so if we reset things again, so if I stop this guy, wipe its state, clean, start Tailscale again, and then we do up and auth key. So the auth key will be different, obviously. It's gonna be the new one from here. And this time we need to do, I think it's login server. So login server, HTTP, or it could be HTTPS. I just could not be bothered dealing with certificates. And then the IP address here. And I think it's 8080. Auth key expired. Okay, did I copy the expired one already? No. Oh, okay, it was just very short-lived. Whoops. Okay, fine, let's create another one. Create. So, okay, expiry, let's do 10 days. And I want it to be reusable, and it needs to be for user 1. Okay, there we go. New key. Okay, put that here. All right, so that's good. This one is up now. It should have an IP address and everything on it. It does. And now let's go and do the same thing here, so we can stop. I mean, this one we can do cleanly. So the clean approach would be Tailscale down, Tailscale logout, Tailscale up, login server, HTTP. Can actually copy the whole up command from here. There. Why is it not working? All right. Okay, so running the command here. This is taking longer than I expected. What's going on? Head scale, nodes list. Okay, it says one up. The other one is not sure what it's doing. 80, the port and everything is fine. So there's something wrong going on. Maybe we do need to use the big hammer and fully reset that Tailscale. Can it ping? Yeah, all right. So I'm just gonna varlib Tailscale, just blow that stuff away, reboot it. See if that helps. Tailscale, status. Okay, logged out, it's fine. Tailscale up, so the off key looks correct. Login server, yeah. Okay, this time it worked fine. All right, so now we've got 2 of them. We can see here the IP addresses of each. So 164.03, that would be ourselves. 04 would be the other. I've not actually tried the subnet feature with that one yet. Or the routes feature, so advertise routes, and then accept routes. I've not tried that yet, so I don't know if that's gonna just work. No, it does not. So it might need the same level of approval, which I have no idea how to do. So let's see. Can we figure that out quickly? If it's the same structure as the hosted version, that would be here. So list routes, let's do list routes, identifier 3, I guess. Okay, we can see it's available, but not approved. Okay, and there's an approved routes commands. We need to use that, I guess. Okay. Identifier, it's on 3. And then the routes we want to approve, it's this guy. Okay, node updated. If we do list, it's approved. All right, so that should work then. Yep. Okay, so that's kind of your, I mean, I'm definitely not the person in the best situation to demo this stuff because, again, I've only played with it for like an hour last night. But that's basically Tailscale and Headscale and how that works. And if you want the full open source stack, you use Headscale plus Tailscale and you're good. The Tailscale client is all on GitHub. It's written in Go. It's all open source. It's fine. Headscale is a like alternative implementation of the server side, also written in Go, also available on GitHub, also seems fine. And then like for a completely different stack that does mostly the same thing, that's what NetBird does, but I've not looked at it yet. Now for actually shipping that within IncusOS, I said for me the main concern was the size. I don't want to add that and then NetBird and then a bunch of other stuff, and every time we do it, we grow the image size by another 25 to 50 megs. That would really not be good. I'm trying to avoid that as much as possible. So that's why I was playing quite a bit, because the default Tailscale setup, so if we look at this client and we go look at Tailscale, and where's the daemon? Tailscale D. So right there, we're looking at 60 megs, basically. Like, what is that, 64 megs? Yeah, 64 megs. That's way too much. Thankfully, they have a way to create smaller builds. So that's what I was playing out again last night. You can take the repos, in this case, it's the 1.90.0 tag of their repo, and they have a tool called build dist, which generates like a proper binary that includes the release tag and that kind of stuff. It supports a few flags. It supports Box, which does the combined client and server single binary thing I mentioned. But it also supports straight up passing a bunch of tags here that are build tags. And then they have a binary called feature tags, which you can use to generate an exact tag list of the features you want to enable or disable. So if you actually go and run this, you can then do dash list, and it lists all of the different Tailscale features that can be optionally built into the binary or not. So that's what I then used to come up with. Where's the issue? I go back to the Tailscale issue in there. Okay, so that's what I used to come up with this list here. Let me zoom in a bit. Which is, I want the tag to get a combined server and client binary. That basically just right there, that saves us 20 megs. So we definitely want that. Then we want to start with an empty feature set effectively and just go from scratch. We need, the one we really need is OS router. That's the one that actually handles most of the logic. We want the Tailscale DNS because that's useful. And we want the resolve D integration as well, so that it configures resolve D correctly. That's gonna bring in dbus and some other pieces, but we kind of need that. Tailnet log, not completely sure what that does, but it seems like it's useful to have in general. Unix socket identity was needed to have the local Unix socket be usable at all for me. I'm not sure why. I was accessing it as root, but apparently you still need that. That doesn't end up with the documentation. That's probably a bug, but anyways, building that. And then we want the ability to advertise and receive routes. So we got those flags. And that's basically it for the features. So you end up with this set of flags that can be put into a list of tags to build using build dist. And that's what then gets us a Tailscale D binary that's at a manageable size. And so that's what we're gonna, they automatically strip it already. So it's already as small as it gets. Like there's no debug symbol or anything left in that thing. So that's good. Like debug info is there because it always is with Go, but actually not stripped. That's weird. I thought it was doing stripping. Maybe it doesn't anymore. Okay, let's see if we save some more space. Oh, that's pretty darn significant, actually. Okay, yeah, yesterday I thought the binaries were stripped, but apparently they're not. Okay, so yeah, scrap the 22 megs. We can actually get it down to just 16. So that's a very good news. Let me just push the binary and make sure it actually works, because sometimes stripping stuff comes with extra fun, but that started just fine. Let's see if we can still ping stuff. Well, that's the wrong one. What's the 6404? Yeah, so that's working fine. And from the other one, can I ping the bridge? Yep. Okay, so it's working correctly. Cool. Very happy about that. That's really making it even smaller. So that's great. Now, I would just like to see what's going on with image publishing. Did we get, so the build did complete, what the build I was looking at earlier. I just want to see if it got published already. Okay, there we go, build. This guy, the tag is 1023 1642. Let's see if we have it on the image server already. That's right, 1632, yeah, it's here. Okay, I'm just gonna do a quick test in my development VM to see if it works. So VGA dev OS. Okay. Yeah, it's looking quite sad right now. Failed to create. Oh yeah, okay, never mind. Yeah, that VM is kind of toast, but that's for other reasons. All right, what am I gonna do? I don't know if I can still factory reset it easily. Possibly. Let's do that. I don't really feel like deploying a new VM from scratch since we've not actually promoted the new image yet. So I'm just gonna use the local Unix socket from IncusOS here. Okay, system. Okay, system security and factory reset like that. Post, and we need to pass it an empty struct. Okay, so that should perform a factory reset. Assuming IncusOS daemon didn't fail and restart during that time. Okay, yeah, it did do the reset, but didn't get to the reboot, I think. So it just bounced the VM. And hopefully it comes back up and initializes. It's my development VM, so it's never in a particularly consistent state, as can be seen here. I think I was doing some testing around the state file the other day. That's probably why it's in that slightly messed up state. But looks like the factory reset did work because it's reinitializing itself from scratch. And what I want to see is the update, because it should go on the network and then pull the latest update. And then once it does, yeah, okay, so it's downloading latest application. So is that working fine? Yeah, that worked. Then OS update. And this one, it shouldn't be able to reboot onto. And on reboot, it should enroll the 2026 signing key, because that's how it's supposed to work. Let's see if that actually happens. Okay, it's rebooting. It's always a bit tricky when we're doing those kind of things of like key rollovers and change to the update logic. It's always a bit nerve-wracking, especially because of the bug where systems installed from the stable channel are not currently sticking to the stable channel. We need to kind of hurry with those kind of fixes so that we've got things nice and consistent for everyone. Okay, did apply the secure boot update. It's rebooting in 5 seconds. Okay. And that should bring it up with the 2026 key. So far, that's looking pretty good. And then we'll be able to query the API to actually see what the keyring looks like for secure boot. Now we're basically doing that work to enroll the 2026 key now, so that when we switch to the 2026 signing key in January, everything works and we don't have systems getting confused. Okay, so we can see applying secure boot update version, bringing up local storage, starting applications, releasing system ready. So that's good. That normally indicates that the update has worked. So I should be able to remove my remote, add it back with the new key. Just add it through that. Okay. Then Incus admin OS system show dev security. What do we have enrolled in there? Platform key is fine. Key enrollment key is fine. Signing key for 2025 is fine. Signing key for 2026 is fine. Yay. Okay, so that's looking good. Excellent. All right, so back to Tailscale. Now I do have that Tailscale binary. I'm not gonna do the integration with the build system right now because that takes forever and not really that interesting to show in the live stream. What I think I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in my development VM and I'm gonna mount a tempfs on user local bin, which then lets me upload whatever I want in there. So that's gonna let me actually upload my Tailscale daemon to devOS user local bin. And then we'll want to symlink Tailscale D to Tailscale in user local bin. Here we go. Probably want to change ownership on that stuff. Okay, and lastly, let's see that this stuff actually works. So if we were to start Tailscale D in there, it's fine. And now if I do the, where's the magic command to join? Yeah, this guy. So now if I run that command in here, some pairs are advertising roots, but accept roots is false. I don't think it was a failure. I think it was just a notification. It was. Okay, so now it's on the tailnet. We can see it here. That's the host name for that VM. So it's got 1064.05, which means from one of my existing clients, I can ping that. Can I also talk to the API? Do I have curl? I've got curl. Okay, fine. Let's go try talking to the IncusOS API over that. Yep, works fine. And as mentioned, we don't have accept routes. So this one has currently no way to ping 10.0.4.1. If we had ping installed in IncusOS, but if we pretend to do it through curl or something, failed to connect, could not connect to server. Where is that instance actually? So if I do Tailscale, go here. Okay, let's just pretend I've got a web server on port 80. Installing netcat. Come on, netcat BSD. Open BSD. Typing is difficult today. There. Okay, so that is not working, but now if I was doing Tailscale set, accept routes, true, then now it works. Okay, so yeah, basically Tailscale is working as expected when run on top of IncusOS. So when I need to get the binaries in place in there, that's kind of the easy part. And then I need to actually allow for its setup and management. So part of that will be a systemd unit that I don't currently have, and then the interactions. So again, we're already getting close to the end of this live stream, but for the few more minutes, I'm gonna just start working on a bit of the boilerplate piece that's gonna come from that. Forgot to commit that yesterday. Clean up command. Okay. Oops. All right, so just clearing that up. The way I plan on handling Tailscale is as a service. We've done that in a bunch of other live streams. So those who've seen that before kind of know the usual way to do that. I've got a lot of binaries laying around here. That shouldn't be here. Okay. We usually start with the API. So we want the API for a similar-ish service. I don't know that I really have one of those, but I don't know. Let's pick oven, and we're gonna call it obviously service Tailscale. And then if we go in here, we need to obviously replace any mention of oven by Tailscale. Is there any more mention of oven in here? There is not. Service Tailscale represents the status and configuration of the Tailscale service. That's fine. The state, I think we can actually include the status. So if we do Tailscale status, it gives us some details. I don't know if that's necessarily useful. Maybe not. I don't know. Okay, this one is not. it's kind of interesting because it actually reports itself as being offline, despite very much not being offline. So I don't know why that's happening. It's kind of interesting. But yeah, so in theory, we could implement some status. I don't know if there's a specific command here. So we definitely don't want the web stuff. Self status would be good. Oh, we can do a JSON status, so that's kind of interesting. Like I just kind of want to know whether things look functional or not. That's probably a bit more information than I actually want to show, to be honest. But we can report the backend state as running or something along those lines, maybe. Or we can also just ignore the status for now until we actually have support requests where we see we need some specific amount of status, and then we can figure out, like, from this, what is actually needed and what's not. But anyway, it's good that they have JSON outputs. That will be very useful. Okay, so just keep that the way it is for now. We need an enabled flag. That makes sense. And then we don't need any of those, but back to the issue. What's going on here? Okay. Back to the issue, I did put some notes as to the config key that I think makes sense. And it's basically this set. So one is login server string JSON login server, and same thing for YAML login server. Okay, so that's that one. If it's left empty, we will have it default to the public Tailscale server. But if there's a value that's set, then it lets you use your head scale or other implementations instead of the main server. Auth key, so that's the pre-auth key to use to enroll. Normally, you can also use Tailscale up without a pre-auth key, which then effectively has you go through a web link to attach it to your account through a web page. Not really something we want to do in the case of IncusOS. I think we're only going to be supporting the auth key for now. But if you're dealing with like a desktop or phone or whatever, you typically won't use the auth key. You'll just use the link, and then you log in to your online account, and that's how you do the pairing. Okay, accept routes is also pretty straightforward, just a boolean for like whether we accept other routes coming from the tailnet. Like the main reason not to do it would be if you're worried about routes coming in that would conflict with local routes, whether it's for other machines attached to different networks on that machine, or conflicting with the bridges that Incus itself is running. But in a properly maintained network, I suspect you would set that to true, and then you would actually set the next one too, so the advertised route, which would be a list of string, to the different routes for your Incus local Incus bridges. To advertise, there we go, without the typo. That's better. Okay, so that should be our config for this service. Can do that. We can do a Golang run fix, because otherwise it's going to complain about the alignment and whatnot. So let's do that. Taking longer than I expected. Okay, that took a while. So that should have done, yeah, this file is all nice and clean. Cool. So this is done. API and Tailscale service like that. Better if I actually include the file. There we go. System tar can go away. All right, so that's the API for this service. Then we'll need to do the usual modification of the state. So that's our internal state. We've got entries for every single service on the system, which means we need one here for Tailscale. Okay. So that will add it there to the state. That's all that's really needed on that one. IncusOS state and Tailscale service. Here we go. And then we need to actually create the service. So again, I can take oven as an example, I guess. Is there something that's closer to it in structure? Not really. Actually, multipath is kind of closer, maybe. Let's use multipath. I'm just thinking of something that also has a systemd service needs to run and then needs to be configured. And multipath is closer than oven, because oven has multiple services. It makes it a bit weirder. You know, always going the lazy route and just taking something that's already been done as the basis, and then gonna use that as a template. Was a mention of lowercase multipath in here? Just a command. Okay, yeah, so that should be fine. So that's the general structure, and then there's the loader here, where we also have kind of load order for the different services. It doesn't really matter in what order it gets loaded. Like, it's not going to be a dependency for any of the others. Like, you should definitely not do ISCSI or NVMe over TCP or Ceph over Tailscale. That would be a terrible idea. So just like the actual loading order, I don't think matters. So we can just leave it in alphabetical ordering, basically. So put that here, and that I think it might actually build as it stands. Like, the service is completely wrong, obviously, but I don't see why it wouldn't build right now. All right, okay. Yeah, it doesn't build because of the name of all of the structs being off, which that's fair. And there's some failures. What's that? Yeah, also the BWN. Yeah, okay, so it's complaining about the struct, which makes sense. So if we just go in here and clean it up a bit. So get, there's no need to initialize anything. There's also no runtime right now, so it doesn't matter. I don't need to retrieve any details because none of that matters. So we can literally return just the internal state for it, and we're done. So that's easy. Update, we'll think about it in a few seconds. Stop, we can just so I mean, stop would literally be just stop the Tailscale D service or Tailscale service. So I can just do that. That's easy enough. Don't really need to clean any of the state or anything for it, I don't think. I can just stop it. There. Starting it, let's for now just do the same logic. So we literally just start the unit. And deal with the config stuff later. Okay. Whether it's enabled, we return not. The struct is this one. Okay. Then update. So we get the thing, save the state on return. If it's currently enabled and it's not enabled anymore, we stop it. That makes sense. Otherwise we would start it and gonna need to update the config. Yeah. So here we'll probably do like something like ensure the service is running. So that would run first. And then we need to detect whether the actual config has changed. And if it has, then do effectively equivalent of a logout plus config to bring the config back up. So this is, I'll put that as a fix main because that's gonna be where some of the more complex logic will need to go in. Now let's see, does that build any better? Okay, a bunch of imports that are not needed. Errors, slog, os, regex. Okay. Os, regex, that can go away. And then here, yep, this one needs to be like that. This one needs to be like that. Getting there. So more imports, conf, strings, time. Okay, so these three can go away. The more sub-process is not currently used. It will be, but it's not currently used. And here we go. So this builds, and that would provide the basic structure for the service. Okay. Just gonna go and do, oops, here. Again, Golang CI run. See if it's unhappy about anything. Yeah, there's a to-do that's planned. And there's currently an unused context, which is not going to remain unused very long, realistically. Actually, it's on get. Yeah, on get, it will remain unused. So this needs to go away like that. And just that one error makes sense. So that's good. So we can commit that. Incus with the services, add Tailscale. And then the last bit of plumbing would be in the REST API. I don't actually know if I need to do anything these days. We've made this pretty robust, this thing pretty robust actually. So if I look at the services, it uses a placeholder for the name, and I think it just loads the list of names directly from the services package. So we might not actually need to do anything here. Let's see. Yeah, it's nothing is hard-coded at all, so we're good. Okay, that's nice. Let's build it. And then push that to our VM. Why? Oh, whoops. That's no root. Use a local bin. There we go. Okay, so now the dev OS VM, so this guy here, in user local bin, it's got Tailscale, Tailscale D, IncusOS D. If I restart, I usually don't restart IncusOS D, I usually just kill it to not have it run its shutdown logic. Okay, IncusOS D is running. And that means if I get a clean terminal somewhere here, Incus admin OS services list on dev. Oops, service list dev. Tailscale is listed, so that's good. Then we can do show on Tailscale, and it shows, yeah, accept routes, advertised, auth key enabled, and login server. So the config itself is all good. We could configure it, it's just not going to do anything at this point. So we'd configure it with, what's its subnet? I want to pick the network there. So we would want to expose that here, and oops, this one as well. Like that, and then the auth key is what I used, what I picked up from here. So the pre-auth key list for my user U1. Okay, that's the currently valid one, so that would go here. Service would be enabled, and then the login server for it is the IPv6 address of this guy, which is this. So that would be the config. That's gonna let me save it fine, maybe? No, I didn't actually persist anything. Well, that's unfortunate. I don't really feel like entering all that stuff again. Why didn't it save this stuff? That's slightly interesting. I must have missed something in the services logic. Let's see. So update. got the new state. It's saving it afterwards. Oh yeah, okay, I never actually apply it on that. That would explain it. So in the case of a config update, the service would have started, which sure, it would have in this. I'm actually surprised that it didn't fail when I tried to run that, but okay. The piece we're actually missing is the, oh, okay, I know why. It's because normally, like we should have gotten a failure basically, and we didn't, so that's what's confusing me here a bit. So n.state.services.tailscale.config should be set to new state.config. Okay, so that would actually attempt to start it, which would then fail. So that's what should actually have happened and didn't. Okay, so if I go back here, user local bin, IncusOS, I can remove it, push the binary, and restart the daemon. And if I go edit the service, this time I'm gonna save that config. I don't feel like entering it. Advertise rounds, because like it is gonna fail, or at least it should be, due to the service, the systemd service not existing yet. So that goes here, off key. Let's do the IP address first, since it's right here. Okay, off key is here. Okay, so if I actually do that with enabled set to false, it should record everything. Let's see, did it? Yep, and it's just not running. Now, if I go and I edit that and I make it true, that should fail. Yep, it fails. The service does not exist. Cool. Well, it's nice when things fail as expected. Not sure why false is not working now, though. Oh, it's trying to stop it and it still doesn't exist. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, fine. So that's basically where I'm gonna leave it for this live stream, since we're getting close to an hour and a half in already. But yeah, basically that was a short update on the state of IncusOS, showing some of the work we've been doing around rolling out new signing keys. I'm gonna be doing a bit more testing on that image, and if everything behaves, we're gonna go and promote that to stable, which will then get everyone onto the 2026, onto supporting the 2026 signing key, and also fixing the channel tracking issue so that from this point on, everyone tracks stable unless they specifically opt into testing. That will make it a lot easier for us. And yeah, then it was a bit of an overview of Tailscale. Again, that's mostly what I learned in an hour yesterday by poking around with it, and kind of showing both backends, like both the commercial Tailscale server that has a lot of features, but and that are, I believe, free for personal use mostly. But obviously trying to get you onto like a paid plan with more features, especially for businesses, or using Headscale as the alternative server side, which, as far as I can tell, works basically the same way. So for us, it's convenient. It will make it easy to actually test against that. And then once we get Tailscale working properly, we can take a look at Netbird, since that's another pretty popular option. I don't necessarily want to go down the rabbit hole of implementing support for every single thing that kind of looks like this. There's quite a bunch, and every time we add one, that means more testing, more work supporting it on our side, and also just growing the base image size, which is not really our goal, but for the most popular options that a lot of folks are currently already using with their Incus servers, then we are definitely open to adding those. All right. Thanks everyone for watching, for your questions in the chat. Again, if you've not watched the longer form video I pushed out last weekend around the Future Fusion Cloud stack and how kind of everything fits together, that should be a pretty interesting watch, kind of showing why we've started doing some of the work on IncusOS initially, like what was the kind of the vision, like how it fits in our larger vision. As mentioned previously, and I think it was also in one of the questions on that video, Operation Center, Migration Manager are pretty not requirements for using IncusOS. IncusOS works perfectly fine on its own. We will be doing a bunch of work to make even more sense standalone for like small lab environments, situations where you don't have multiple clusters. But for large scale deployments, then you can use Operation Center. That integrates pretty deeply with IncusOS to handle update management at larger scale, handle cluster creation, all of those kind of things. All right, I see there's just one more question. Out of curiosity, how do you decide what should be part of IncusOS as a service or application versus hosted workload on top of Incus in a container or similar? Yeah, so that's a good question. Normally, we would be basically saying like, put everything in containers if you can, especially anything that needs. So that question kind of came along with things like services, oven services. What we don't want is special snowflakes. You don't want to have a cluster of 10 machines and 2 or 3 of those machines are the special snowflakes that run more services, more config than the rest. Because if those machines go down, you won't really remember which was doing the extra stuff, and eventually you're going to lose a majority of those and everything will fall apart. So we very actively try to avoid that. That's why we're not interested in running the Oven API services or the Ceph API services or the LinStore API services directly on IncusOS, because those are the kind of services that you would want to be able to move around your cluster, and so they're better run as containers or VMs on top of Incus itself. Now, services that are needed to put a cluster together and to manage the cluster, that's the kind of thing we're happy to put in IncusOS itself. So that's why we've got all of the storage stuff, because you need to access your storage. That's why we've got the Oven client side, because you need to bring up the network. And that's also why Tailscale and Netbird, to us at least, makes sense to run at that level, because if you're running just a standalone server at, I don't know, Hetzner or VH or something like that, and you want that to be accessible to your tailnet, then it makes sense to be able to deploy the server with it directly, so you don't have the chicken and egg problem of like not being able to manage your server until your container has started or your VM has started. So that makes sense to run as a service directly at that level. The other angle we think of occasionally is not every system running IncusOS is going to be running Incus. That's a bit weird because of the naming of it, but Operation Center, Migration Manager also come to mind. If you're bootstrapping a new environment with Operation Center, you might, like Operation Center itself can't run containers. It can deploy clusters that can run containers and VMs, but itself, it doesn't run Incus at all on that machine. So if you want to be able to manage that machine through Tailscale, then you would need it to be a service there, because you can't just run it as a container on top of it. So that's kind of the idea. I think the other consideration, specifically on the Tailscale Netbird type thing, is I usually see it as a bad thing to allow containers or VMs running on top of Incus to have API access to the host. You usually want the two to be separate so that there's no risk of attempts to attack the host. So if you're going to be running Tailscale or Netbird inside a container or VM, then for them to be useful to actually manage the environment, they need completely unfiltered routing to all of the other containers and VMs in the environment across all the networks, as well as direct access to the host. That's possible. You could create a separate network just for that, and like a management type network for those kind of workloads. But it makes mistakes pretty easy to happen and makes it harder to have a solid security right from the start. So that's kind of how we're thinking about it. Doesn't mean we'll always do it right. Probably not. I'm sure there's going to be some stuff that later on we'll be like, why did we do this natively? Or why are we like, the other way around is easier. Like adding a native service or application is later on is far easier than removing it from the base OS. We've not touched on, doing major version bumps with deprecation notices or any of that kind of stuff at this point. If we do a bunch of mistakes that we need to correct, we're gonna have to go through that. So far, we're really avoiding, hoping that we make the right decisions and we don't need to do too much of that, because that's quite a bit of pain. As much as you can try to notify users that like, hey, the feature you're currently using is gonna go away in the next 6 months or something, a bunch of them are gonna miss it. A bunch of them will forget, and then when the feature actually does go away, then you still end up with a bunch of people being broken. So that's never pleasant. We're gonna try and keep that to a minimum. All right. Once again, thanks everyone for watching this. Next week is gonna be an Incus release week, so there won't be a live stream. Instead, it's gonna be just the Incus release announcement video on Friday, and then I should be back to live stream the week after. I've got some stuff going on in my life that means that at some point I will have to skip live streaming for a little while, probably. But if that happens, you just will notice like 1 week where there's no live stream, or a couple of weeks where there's no live stream. But yeah, next week is a release week, so just expect a release video on Friday. Thanks a lot for watching. See you in the next one. Bye.